Welcome to the Multiply Your Success podcast, where each week we help growth-minded entrepreneurs and franchise leaders take the next step in their expansion journey. I'm your host, Tom Dufour, CEO of Big Sky Franchise Team, and as we open, I'm wondering, how do you balance your time between your spouse, your family, and your business? And do you have a balance that works for you? Well, our guests today are Robert and Kay Lee Fukui, and they share with us some of their insights into managing your relationships, especially the relationship with your husband or wife, while running a business. Robert and Kay Lee are co-founders of I-61 Inc., and they empower married entrepreneurs to achieve a balanced work-life dynamic. Robert brings 25 years in sales and marketing, and Kay Lee has extensive experience in banking and family business operations, and they combine their expertise to help couples scale their businesses without sacrificing their marriage. Their innovative consulting program, Power Couples by Design, and their book called Tandem, The Married Entrepreneur's Guide for Greater Work-Life Balance, which we discuss on the podcast today, reflect their dedication to thriving relationships and successful enterprises. You're going to love this interview, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm excited to have you all on the program here and really talking about this idea of marriage and business and all things orienting around that. And one of the things you've recently finished is a book called Tandem. And so I'd love for you just to open a little bit and give us a little overview about what the book's about and what led you to write it.
Thanks, Tom. Really.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Excited to be here. In franchises, that's, as we said off air before we recorded, there's a section in our chapter about thinking like a franchisor. And so, our book Tandem, The Married Entrepreneur's Guide for Greater Work-Life Balance, is geared for the married entrepreneur. The husband and wife may or may not be working together, but one at least owns a business. You're married, and you're trying to do marriage and build a business, right? And especially, I think even with franchisees, sometimes, you think you're buying a business in a box. And so you think everything should be hunky-dory. You just buy this thing, you get it, you get your management team, your crew, and you're good, right? Next thing you know, you're working probably longer than if you just had a 9-to-5 job. And if you break it down hourly, might be getting paid less, right? And so that's not what we signed up for, especially because now you're not even able to have the freedom that you wanted to spend time with your spouse, your kids, and all that, enjoy life as you're building this business. And so the book is really to address these issues: is how do you do marriage and business well? How do you have work-life balance? What does it even mean, and is it even achievable? And how do you do both well, I guess, is the bottom line. And so that's kind of what our book is about. It's part marriage relationship coaching, and part business consulting, all wrapped up in one.
Well, it's fantastic. And it's one of the drivers why I was excited to have you on the show. I work with my wife, and many of our clients that I've worked with over the years, whether they own and run the business together, or one spouse owns the business and the other is in a supporting role and trying to balance all of these things that go on. I guess to lead into that, as we start thinking about this, I like this idea in the notes that we reviewed about harmonizing marriage and business. And so can you talk through a little bit about strategies for creating this kind of balance, if there is such a thing, with running the business and also managing your relationship?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to work-life balance or imbalance in a lot of people's lives, we don't know exactly what it is, but we know we're not feeling it right now, right? We know things are a little bit out of whack. We probably feel we're not, spending the time we want to in our personal side. And so the first thing we always recommend is, number one, as husband and wife, you got to sit down and define what balance means to you. And first of all, it's not a quantitative measurement. It's not about how much time you spend in business or at home. It's a qualitative measure, right? So I'm speaking of business owners, so you should understand quantitative versus qualitative. Qualitative is subjective, right? And at the end of the day, as you're talking to husband and wife, is like, what's the bare minimum thing we can do every day, regardless of how busy life gets, that will make us feel connected and you feel emotionally supported or physically supported of each other? Research shows, and even psychological research shows, that as little as 5 minutes of an intentional time every day as husband and wife, meaning you're looking each other in the eye, you don't have your phones, you're not thinking about business stuff, but you're just asking, hey, I love you, I appreciate you, how can I support you? And having a 5-minute just eye-to-eye, heart-to-heart conversation is good for the day. And people might think 5 minutes isn't a lot, but how many times do you really do that on a daily basis as husband and wife, right? So it's not a time issue, right? It's really quality of time. And so we'd say, okay, let's, in your calendar, deconstruct it, meaning start with a clean slate, and whatever you say the priorities of your life are before business, each other, yourself, of course, your kids, and whatever, start blocking out time during the week for those quality times, right? The date nights, the 15-minute check-ins. We start first thing in the morning with our check-ins. And so things like that. So start with a clean slate on your calendar and put the priorities in first and then block it out. And then it leaves you a lot of time in the calendar to still do business.
And it can be as small as we walk the dog after work. We take the dog around the block and we get some exercise, check in with each other, see how our day was that way. When we're having dinner, we're not talking about work the whole time. And it's just nice to kind of feel like you put on a different hat, like, okay, this is kind of how we end our work day, by going on the walks, just checking in with each other, getting a little exercise, getting some fresh air, getting away from our office.
Yeah. So it's kind of that transition period, right? It's a psychological, switch. And it's a transition period for us to go from work mode into, husband and wife mode.
Inevitably, it seems sometimes running the business and marriage and so on can result in conflict at some point between the relationship and the business. You talk about using disagreements as a catalyst for growth in marriage and business. So can you shed some light on that?
Yeah. We're always going to have points of disagreement, right? We have, we're two different people, and sometimes you're going to have two different viewpoints. And that's a good thing. And especially if you put it in the business context, as husband and wife, we have similarities in personalities and styles, but we also have differences. And those differences are very healthy because those different perspectives, if you just think of it just in business itself, right? You don't build a team around you that think exactly like you, right? That wouldn't be healthy at all, because then there's no growth. The different perspectives are actually healthy, but how do you prevent it from becoming a conflict and becoming an issue and getting personal as husband and wife, right? So let's make the issue and don't make it personal and make it emotional. And next thing you know, now we're having an emotional conflict, and then we can't resolve an issue and move forward, right? Because if we can't resolve the issue, it's really hard to move forward in business and just at home and in life. So it's not just a business issue, right? So it's a life issue. So when it comes to conflict, we have what we call rules of engagement. In a disagreement, or when we have a conversation that potentially can get heated, what's in bounds, what's out of bounds. And so out of bounds means we avoid triggers, the thing that can trigger each other negatively.
And yes, we know what those buttons are, you guys.
Right? What kind of phrase, saying, even like a nonverbal response that can trigger your spouse, right? So when we get in a heated moment, sometimes we want to let them have it a little bit.
What?
Exactly. And so we might do something that for me, I shouldn't do, which is be sarcastic, right? So that's just going to set her off. Mm-hmm. And, looking back, right, if you're just looking from the top in, that's not healthy for the conversation. It's not going to help it. It's just going to make it worse. So that's an example of out of bounds in rules of engagement. We don't do that because it's not going to be productive for the conversation. And in inbounds would be the things that create a more safe and healthy environment for a conversation.
Because a lot of times we marry somebody the complete opposite. I know Robert's very detailed and I'm more of the creative, and it used to drive me nuts. But now I love it. I embrace it when I need something a project that needs to be very detailed. I'm like, honey, can you look at this and help me out? So we try and work in each other's strengths as opposed to letting it bother us, because for some reason when we were dating, we thought it was cute. But once you get married, it's like, oh my gosh, you're really annoying me.
Yeah. So, as just kind of pointed out our differences. So we use kind of disc personality assessment for ourselves and for our clients to see where we connect and where we have synergy and where there's potential conflict. And one, as a CS, I'm more introverted. She's more of an I, which is extroverted. And so when we have conversations and where we're trying to make decisions, she's a verbal communicator and she's going to process verbally. I'm more internal. So I need the time to think internally and be quiet. So that can cause an issue right there because I need a moment, but she wants to keep talking out and it drives me nuts. And also sometimes when she's talking it out, I'm thinking she's making a decision. And so I start to disagree because I'm afraid she's making a decision when actually all she's doing is just brainstorming verbally. So we've had to learn of how to, address each other's communication style. And, one, she knows I need time to kind of think, and I know she just needs to process verbally, but I don't need to disagree with her. I just need to have a conversation with her. So that's kind of that inbounds is, do allow her to talk, right? And I just know I'm not trying to fix anything or come up with a solution. I'm just having a conversation with her. And then she also knows I need time, right? And so that can drive each other crazy when someone actually wants to move forward and the other one wants time. That in itself can drive each other nuts. So when we need a moment to process, we just let the other person know, I need a moment, maybe 15 minutes, a half an hour or whatever, and then we'll come back and pick up the conversation. So that's kind of, what's an example of inbounds in the rules of engagement.
Kay Lee, much like you, I'm a maxed out I on the disc and a very high D, and my wife is a CS like you, Robert. So as you're describing it, I said, oh, yes, that sounds so familiar. I've been through that myself many times and definitely relate to that. So as you start talking about embracing this conflict and setting some of these boundaries, what's inbounds and out of bounds, do you have any maybe first steps that a couple might be able to take that listens into this, say, okay, I like this. My husband or wife, we haven't had that kind of a conversation. Where would you even start?
Well, just kind of like the first thing we do with our clients is do the DISC assessment. And you can even take the free ones and all that. That's fine. And we have a little tool that kind of shows a little chart about, where, the personality type and communication styles, and then have a conversation about this is why you guys rub each other the wrong way in moments of conflict. And then we come up with a solution. And sometimes you need a third party, especially if you've been married for, more than a minute. A lot of times it's hard to resolve these issues on your own because that turns into conflict. Right? And so just trying to resolve, your communication styles and how to communicate better, sometimes that conversation itself can create conflict. So sometimes, don't be afraid to get outside help and perspective. But the DISC profile or Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, any of those things, whatever you're comfortable with, is always helpful and enlightening because you want to know what is your go-to when it comes to time of stress. And in those times of stress, we kind of go to our corners of our type, right? And I know a lot of people have a hard time with these assessments. They say, they're pigeonholing me. That doesn't define me. And you're right. It doesn't define you. But what it does is create self-awareness of what's your go-to when things get stressful. Like I said, I'm going to crawl into a corner. She wants to more attack. She wants to resolve the issue. So she's going to go on attack mode, or what seems like attack mode to me because I'm in a corner, right? She's not really attacking, but she wants to resolve the issue and she's verbal, right? And so what we do from there is then based on that, knowing what our go-to would be, I have to say, okay, honey, I need a moment. If we're going to have this conversation, you coming at me is not going to help. But just if I say, honey, I need 15 minutes to think, and then we'll come back to the conversation, that will appease her because she wants to resolve the issue, right? She doesn't necessarily need a solution, but she doesn't want me just to run away and hide because then it's unresolved. But if I tell her, give me 15 minutes or half hour or even to the end of the day, and then I'll come back and pick up the conversation, that's good, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you tell me that you love me. I think too, another thing is sit down and talk with your spouse about their childhood and find out some of the things that triggers them, because then you'll be so much more empathetic. When Robert would get upset about something and I have no idea, but then when he would tell me the story behind it, the childhood, the trauma or the trigger, I would have so much more empathy and be like, oh, now I understand. It kind of unlocks it a little bit.
Well, just like for you, honey, about stepping out, one of the things we had in counseling when we were going through our own rules of engagement in counseling, she said, okay, if you have a disagreement and you feel it gets heated and you need a moment, don't just walk out without saying anything.
Yeah, because in my family, we didn't resolve conflict. Our idea of conflict was just hanging up on the phone, get in the car, storm out of the driveway, walk away from people. And so when Robert and I would get into a heated conversation, I would have anxiety thinking, oh my gosh, he's going to leave. And is he going to come back? And so that would just like really make me fearful. As opposed to now, if he needs time away, he'll, like he said, he'll say like, honey, I love you. I need a timeout right now. I'll be back in such and such time. And we can pick up the conversation. And that just eases me. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. But each couple, it's different. You're going to have different issues.
One of the things that helps embrace some of this relational aspect of running the business and blending the two together, the marriage and the business all in one, is this idea of maximizing margins in the business. And you talk about not just the financial margins, but the time margins as part of this. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that idea and what you mean by that.
Time margin is, we only have we start with 24 hours in a day. And then we got to do stuff, right? And then hopefully we have the time left over to enjoy life as well. So, so the time left over to enjoy life, we'll just call that in financial terms, the profit margin. That's the goal. That's the stuff we keep and we enjoy, right? And so how do we build that margin? And so, in business, a lot of times the go-to is if things aren't going well, or if you want to grow the business or whatever, the go-to is put in more time. If we don't have the money to hire more people or to invest into other systems and processes, whatever, to increase efficiency. But what we'll do, our go-to tends to be put in more time. And so what happens is if you look at some of the performance research out there, is that the average business owner spends about only 35% of their time on the business activities and 65% of the time on in the business activities. So for those who are not familiar with that term, in the business activities are those day-to-day duties, administrative duties, the things that just to check out the to-do list to keep things moving. But the on the business activities are the things that would move the business forward. And that's like, maybe it's going to look for a new partnership or a new venture, or, for restaurants, testing out new menus or some research and development. Some of those big items that putting more time in it would move the business forward. And we don't spend enough time on those areas because we're too busy on the day-to-day. And so what we need to do to increase your time margin is to flip the ratio around to 65% of time on the business activities. So if you think about all the things that would be healthy for your business, but you haven't got to because you're caught up in everything else, right? Think about that. If you kind of put more concentration of your time in those areas, what would that do to the trajectory of your business? And also, just for yourself, I think you'd be even more fulfilled in working the business, because we probably enjoy that aspect of it more than handling a customer service issue or invoicing or doing administrative work, right? And so trying to get that ratio around so you spend more time on those on-the-business activities will not only move the business forward, but will also energize you because you're doing stuff that you love.
And it's things that only the owner can do, like the innovation. You hear people say like, oh, I've been wanting to do this for years, you know what I mean? But they just never made time or got around to being able to move the business forward and grow in it.
Yeah. So, and in fact, because even in a franchise, in a franchisee or a franchise system, they give you systems and processes, right? But yet, even within that, as the individual owner, there's still going to be stuff that you got to figure out on your own. And so we look at, okay, there's kind of an acronym we use, ADE, ADE. In the business activities, what can you automate to make it more smoothly, more efficient? What can you delegate? And what do you might need to eliminate? What are those tasks in your bucket that maybe you need to say no to now or forever? What should you be delegating more of? And then what do you need to automate or automate more of? And so when you kind of look at what you do on a day-to-day basis and then say, okay, these are the on the business activities, the 2 to 3 tasks that I really enjoy, I'm really good at, that's the stuff I want to do more of. But the rest of the stuff, how do we automate, delegate, or eliminate?
For someone who maybe ends up listening into this, says, boy, I like what they're saying. It's music to my ears. And my husband or wife and I, we sure could use a coach or a consultant or someone to kind of help us sort through this. Give us a little overview of how someone can get in touch with you for you to support them or help them out with this.
Well, you can go to marriedentrepreneur.co/multiply and find out more about us and our book. And yeah.
Yeah, so there'll be three options. There's, of course, the book Tandem, the Married Entrepreneur's Guide for Great Work-Life Balance. Or if you just want to kick the tires a little bit, there's actually a free guide on better work-life balance to talk about some of the things we discuss. And then if you're just impatient and do want to talk to us, like you said, then there is a link there for us to just book a call.
Well, this is a great time in the show where we make a transition and we ask every guest the same 4 questions. And the first question we ask is, have you had a miss or two on your journey and something you learned from it?
Yeah. So the first thing.
You got a funny one? Are you laughing?
Well, it's funny now. Oh. But I remember early on in our marriage, in fact, it might have been before we even got married, but we're at least dating or engaged. I was investing into my first kind of rental property. And I did all the due diligence, and I'm going to invest into it. And Kay Lee says, I don't have a good feeling about this. And I just kind of poo-pooed it because, feelings don't make, doesn't add up in the, in the due diligence. But so I went ahead and invested into it. Well, it cost us dearly. And so I did that one more time after I got married. And then when the pain hits in the 6-figure mark, you finally go, you know what, maybe I should listen to my wife's feelings, because that is relevant. Right? Because sometimes I know a lot of entrepreneurs that run by gut, right? And so not so much by due diligence and facts and figures. And so you need both. And so what I learned from that is, like I said earlier in the conversation, she's got a different perspective in how she thinks and evaluates things, but it doesn't make it any less significant or relevant than the way I do it. And so I listened to her, and from then on, we only make decisions, especially big ones like that, or just big ones in general, unless we're both at peace with a decision. And so that's kind of what I learned.
Yeah, because it's kind of hard for me on that note is I can't prove it. I don't have any facts or figures. I can't say, here's the numbers, because he's a numbers guy. And so when you're just going on a hunch, so it can be kind of challenging.
Yeah.
So I agree on that one, honey. That was a big one.
Of course you agree.
I think there's probably a miss because I didn't decide I'm more spontaneous. Robert's the planner. And we probably missed out on some things in life because I'm like, let's just see how it goes. And then the opportunity is missed because we didn't plan ahead and it's already sold out or the opportunity is no longer there.
Let's talk about on the other side. Let's talk about a make or two, a highlight that you'd like to share.
I think for me, just making the leap into kind of entrepreneurship. Growing up, that wasn't never on my radar. My dad was actually a pastor, and he just told me, go to school, get good grades, get a good job and all that, stay out of debt. So not having a business was never on my radar. And actually when we were dating, Kay Lee said, I can see you having a business. And I thought it was just too risky. But, years later, as I started processing, I was like, you know what? Yeah, maybe I'll entertain that, as I got to my mid 40s. And so I made the leap 8 years ago. And that's been just probably the greatest decision I've made. It's not always been, successful in everything we do, but I think the fulfillment of what I do now is just greater now because I get to work with these business owners and the team and now with the couple and helping them through these issues, both in marriage and in business, I think is just so much fulfilling than working in a Fortune 500 company and just making the shareholders happy.
And I'd say the leap for me was we wrote our book and we decided to do a non-traditional book tour. So we, people that we knew, we contacted them and we said, we would love to come out. And if any of your community would like to hear about our book, please let us know. And oh my gosh, people had dinner. It was different at every stop. Somebody had a dinner party for us. We met at the library because you guys, libraries are free if you ever need a place to have a meeting. You just need a library card. Coffee places, we've had churches. And so we did a big circle. We were gone for, was it 6 weeks?
6 weeks, drove around the country.
Yeah. And then we got to see a lot of parks and we went to the Grand Tetons, you guys. It is so beautiful. We went to Bryce Canyon. That was beautiful. And met so many people along the way that we didn't even know. People just kept introducing us to other people along the way. And we had a fabulous time.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, the name of the show is Multiply Your Success. And we always ask every guest, have you used a multiplier to grow yourself personally or professionally or any of the businesses you've been involved with?
Yeah, for me, the multiplier has always been just having good counsel around. Of course, I got my wife, but, I'm also part of a mastermind group I joined about 4 years ago. And that's been huge, being able to sit with, 12 business owners, twice a month, and talk about issues and brainstorming for each other, encourage each other. And it's not just about the advice you get that helps your business, but also you're growing with each other. And I think that in itself, I think that creates an environment that you're always energized in your business. Because sometimes you need a little pick-me-up, right? Even though we have each other and we'll encourage each other, but sometimes coming from your peers too, that's that added extra boost. And so it's not just the tactical stuff that helps, but it's really the community that really boosts you and keeps you energized and moving forward. And so that's always been a multiplier for me.
I'd say be intentional about relationships, connecting to people, reaching out. I hear people say like, oh, well, nobody reaches out to me. Or I'm like, well, have you connected with them lately? They're like, no, I haven't. I'm just waiting on them. And I just think, especially in this day and age, meeting with people in person and just staying connected and encouraging each other, and we're big in community as well in different areas. We have a community like in Hawaii, Montana, Alaska.
Wonderful. Well, the final question we ask every guest before they go is, what does success mean to you?
Yeah, so that's can be very subjective, right? But we came up with a 4-quadrant chart. Well, just basically a cross, essentially. And it's how do you take care of yourself, your relationship, your business, and your wealth? So the wealth being the money just you invest into and just grows without you working at it, right? So the self and the relationship part those are the two areas that we tend to neglect because we're busy with the business or investing or whatever. We're doing this thing to give us a better life in the future. But in the meantime, we're missing out on some of the best times of our lives, right? As you're younger.
And our health is terrible.
When you're older.
Well, yeah. When you don't take time for yourself and you just let your health go, oh my gosh, how many entrepreneurs do we see there?
So for us, success is how well am I taking care of myself, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. How well are we taking care of our relationship, each other, our friends, and our other family members? And then, of course, how well is our business going? And of course, how's our money growing without us working for it? And so when those 4 areas we feel like we're doing good, we're investing well in those areas, you just feel more fulfilled and you're enjoying life, right? Because if you're only focused on one area and the other areas are being neglected, you don't feel as fulfilled or as balanced.
I would totally agree.
Well, that's very, very well said. Well, Robert and Kay Lee, as we bring this to a close, is there anything you're hoping to share or get across that you haven't had a chance to yet?
Well, I just think, when it comes, this whole topic is about kind of work-life balance. And I think it's number one, you never really arrive, right? All the things we talked about and achieving balance and maintaining our relationship as well as building our business, that's always a work in progress. And you got to keep fighting for it. And the bottom line is don't accept the status quo. Mm-hmm. Don't think this is as good as it's going to get, right? Always be growing in your own self. That's one of the questions, ourself. How do we grow professionally? How do we grow our business? How do we grow our wealth? Always be in a position of growing in these areas.
And growing together.
Because there's always something to learn, mm-hmm. right? And so when you start to, that rest on your laurels kind of thing, that's when you can fall into a rut. And life is just not as fulfilling. You just, even if you have a business, it's like almost like a job, 9-to-5 job, right? You're just doing it. But if you're continually growing in all those areas, yourself and your relationship and your business and your wealth, then, you're going to do well. And so again, I think the bottom line is don't accept the status quo of where you are. Always be moving forward, pushing forward to do better.
Robert and Kay Lee, thank you so much for a fantastic interview. And let's go ahead and jump into today's 3 key takeaways. So takeaway number 1 is when they talked about harmonizing business and marriage and helping think about, do you have a work-life balance or a work-life imbalance? And they said very often entrepreneurs and leaders will look at this and think about a quantitative measure. How much time am I spending, or how much time do I need to cut off or allocate? And really what they said is you need to look at qualitative measures first. What is the quality time that you're actually spending together? And I thought it was interesting when they shared that research found that as little as 5 minutes of high quality time can produce that connection point for your relationship and your marriage. And they gave the example for them. What they do is they walk the dog around the block at the end of the day and use that as a window of time to just connect with one another. Takeaway number 2 is when you have disagreements in the business and the marriage, or sometimes both. And they said it's oftentimes caused through similarities and really the differences or different perspectives you take. And so they suggest having some rules of engagement put into place. What is out of bounds that you're not allowed to say that neither one should venture into? And so they've established their own rules of engagement, but I think it's a great takeaway to start with. And they said one way to help you with that is, for example, taking a DISC personality assessment or one of the other Myers-Briggs or an Enneagram assessment. And while it's not to pigeonhole you in any way, shape, or form, it's just to help you understand yourself and how you react under stress. So I thought that was a great little takeaway. And if you do that together, that'll get us back to takeaway number 1 of spending some quality time together. That'd be a fun little exercise to do with your partner and your spouse. And takeaway number 3 was when they talked about maximizing margins. And I really liked this concept that they talked about in your business, you know where your margins are. And if you're maximizing them from a profitability standpoint, essentially, what is your profit margin, the financial profit margin in your business? And I love how they talked about this idea of having a time-focused profit margin. How much time are you profiting out of the business? And they said an average business owner spends about 35% of their time working on the business and about 65% of their time working in the business. And how can you work toward flipping that around? And they have an acronym called AID, where the A stands for automate, the D represents delegate, and E stands for eliminate. And now it's time for today's win-win. So today's win-win comes from the end of the episode when they defined success and what success means for them. And they created a quadrant and they said, how do you take care of yourself, number 1, your relationship, number 2, your business, number 3, and your wealth, number 4. So how do you take care of yourself, your relationship, your business, and your wealth? And they look at that to try to give them a holistic picture on what success looks like for them. And so that's the episode today, folks. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast and give us a review. And remember, if you or anyone you know might be ready to franchise their business or take their franchise company to the next level, please connect with us at bigskyfranchiseteam.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to having you back next week.